Indiana's Newscenter presents a special Decision 08 debate on location at the Reinhardt Center on the IPFW campus.
Before we get to the debate, we have some information about the office. Article 8, Section 8 of the Indiana Constitution requires the election of a state superintendent of public instruction. The election for this office is held in the same year as the presidential and gubernatorial elections. The person who wins the election on November 4th will begin serving on the second Monday in January of 2009. Unlike other statewide offices, there are no term limits for this position. The Superintendent of Public Instruction chairs the Indiana State Board of Education. This is the body that sets the educational policies and procedures for the state. The superintendent also directs the work of the Indiana Department of Education. The State Department of Education conducts research and compiles data that assists the State Board of Education in making its decisions. The department implements the policies and procedures established by the State Board of Education. It also provides technical assistance to school corporations throughout the state. Our two candidates are Republican Dr. Tony Bennett, who is currently in his second year as the superintendent of Greater Clark County Schools, and Democrat Dr. Richard Wood, who recently retired after serving 19 years as the superintendent of Tippecanoe School Corporation. He is also past president of the Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents.
Welcome to Reinhardt Recital Hall in the Reinhardt Music Center on the IPFW campus. I'm Melissa Long, and I will be the moderator of tonight's debate. This debate is being brought to you by Indiana's Newcenter and the Mike Down Center for Indiana Politics. Our candidates are Republican Dr. Tony Bennett and Democrat Dr. Richard Wood. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage. The format for this debate was agreed to by both of our candidates this evening. The order for speaking was determined by a coin toss, and we'll begin the debate with opening statements from each candidate. After opening statements, the candidates will be asked questions on a rotating basis. One of the candidates will answer the question, and the other candidate will have the opportunity to comment on that answer. And we do expect those comments to be germane to that answer. The sequence for each question will end when the candidate who answered the question will be allowed a brief rebuttal comment. And the debate will conclude with closing statements from each candidate. Our questions have come from public school superintendents from around the state and from Indiana's Newscenter. Our first opening statement will come from Dr. Wood.
Thank you very much. I should clarify for the members of the audience that I'm going first because I did lose the coin toss. I would like to, first of all, I think on behalf of Dr. Bennett and myself, express our appreciation to Indiana Purdue Fort Wayne, the Mike Down Center, the Indiana News Center, and all those that have made this event possible. I would also like to thank those of you who are in attendance this evening or those who may be watching or listening to this broadcast for your interest in making an informed decision about this particular race. And when we're speaking about races, you know, our country has been involved in a number of races in recent years. When I was a boy, we were involved in the space race. And over the years, we've been involved in what we call the arms race. And we're now engaged in another race. We're engaged in an education race. Ladies and gentlemen, the countries around the world, and I'm not just talking about the superpowers, are very interested in a very competitive education system, and they are putting vast resources and commitments in their individual countries into the education of their students. What is the prize in this race? Well, very simply, ladies and gentlemen, the prize is to have what we maybe take for granted in this country. You want to have an expectation that your children can have a better life than what was available to the previous generation. You want to have a life where you can have high expectations, that you can have hope, and that you know that you have an unlimited potential for the future. Now, I say we perhaps take these things for granted because we've had many of these things in this country for many years. But we cannot rest idly and watch this race. We must be active participants in this race. And it isn't just a national concern. It's not a state concern. This is a local concern. every community must be aware of the fact that we are engaged in this competition. We are no longer competing against our own students. We are competing against students from other states and from other countries. Now, I want to suggest to you there is nothing wrong with this race. It's a productive race, and perhaps everyone can win. And there is nothing wrong with us raising the standard of living of other countries in the world. But we have to make sure when that happens that it does not come at the expense of our standard of living and our quality of life. We still need to maintain that degree of hope and high expectation in this country. So it is a local issue. The state superintendent and the Indiana Department of Education must serve to assist local communities in positioning themselves to be well equipped to have their children be highly competitive in this education race. We must be a resource so that local communities can do the best for their students and provide them the best opportunity to be successful. Thank you.
Dr. Bennett.
Thank you. Like Dr. Wood, I too would like to thank the organizers and sponsors of this event. And I would also like to take a moment to thank Dr. Wood. Probably unlike every political race you've seen this election cycle, you have two gentlemen up here who have been kind and have been agreeable even in our disagreements, and it's been a breath of fresh air. So I'd just like to start by thanking Dr. Wood. To begin my opening statement, I had an opportunity yesterday to attend Bethel Community Church down in Evansville. Heard the senior pastor, Brent Nicholson, speak, and his message kind of hit me pretty hard. His message had to do with the fact, what do we do with our one life? That at the end of that linear time we spend on this earth, do we say in our last days, we have spent that time to be the best we can? And ladies and gentlemen, I would challenge you to ask that same question as it applies to K-12 education in Indiana. I would ask you to think for a moment about the children of Indiana and how they just have one chance at K-12 education. They just have one life with us as educators. And are we doing the best we can do to arm those kids to compete nationally and internationally? And I will tell you, I don't believe we have. I think we must produce a system that clearly says to any business that if we want to move our business and have the best trained workforce, we move to Indiana. If we want to move our kids and have them be exposed to the best education system, that family should sit around the dinner table and say, let's move to Indiana. And if we do that, we can say at the end of that K-12 life, when those kids walk across the stage, we've done our job. We believe we have a plan for that. That plan includes restoring discipline to our schools so that they are high-level learning environments without distractions. Driving dollars to the classroom where real learning occurs. And finally, making sure we recruit, train, and retain and evaluate our teachers like the professionals they are. We believe we have that plan. We have a vision and we have a plan so that just like Reverend Nicholson said Sunday, when our kids walk across the stage at the conclusion of their education life in Indiana public schools, we know we've put them out there with the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bennett. And you will be taking the first question. This question comes from Keith Spurgeon, who is superintendent of the Metropolitan School District of Mount Vernon. And this question was also echoed by several other superintendents around the state. It has to do with school consolidation. Do you support the Kernan-Shepard report recommendation of a minimum school district size of 2,000? And if you support consolidation, how would you force and or encourage schools to deal with this issue?
Well, let me start by saying I do not, while I 100% a bipartisan study that helps us study and work to make our taxing units. We have 2,600 taxing units in the state of Indiana, and it is incumbent upon superintendents and the CEOs of taxing units to make sure we operate efficiently. I support the Kernan-Shepard's report on that. I don't believe there's a magic number. I don't believe the magic number is 2,000. What I do believe is there are magic opportunities in our schools that we need to capture. And the Department of Ed should be a resource for capturing those opportunities. We should supply school corporations with objective consultants so that when school corporations want to engage in those efficiency studies, they have the voice and the expertise of an objective consultant who will help them make an informed decision. Other than that, we should be sure we are always doing everything we can to maximize efficiency. In our hometown, we meet with all of our taxing units so that we make sure that the municipalities spend their money to serve the citizens, and we spend our money to educate kids, and we avoid duplication. So I do 100% support the Kernan-Shepard report. I don't believe we should necessarily force school corporations to consolidate. We should be a resource and encourage them to do so with very accurate and clear information.
Dr. Wood, a response?
Thank you. First of all, I think there are two types of consolidation. There is economic consolidation, which we can all agree is in our best interest to ensure that we're doing the maximum effort we can to do cooperative purchasing and work together, eliminate duplication. And I think we're finding that many of our school corporations are effectively engaged in this now through our education service centers, through special ed cooperatives, through vocational education cooperatives. And as Dr. Bennett says, I certainly agree this is something the Department of Education needs to continue to foster. I think there are also things we can do as a state to allow school corporations to share employees, that there are things we can do with teacher contracts to make it possible for an individual to hold employment with more than one school corporation, that school districts could then share perhaps a curriculum director or a foreign language instructor. So there are creative things that we can do. As far as political consolidation, I do not believe we should force that. School districts have the capacity to do this already under the law, and there are some real benefits still to having local control over local schools and having individuals vote for their individual school board members who have a close tie. I think it is important that we continue to foster the idea of the community school and that each individual community is responsible for the success of the education program because they have that direct ownership and they have that direct feeling and understanding of what's best for their community, what the community can tolerate, what they can bear as far as taxation and other challenges. So again, economic consolidation, yes. Political consolidation, we do not need to force that beyond the status quo.
Dr. Bennett, a rebuttal?
I think the Department of Ed has to do a better job with deregulation so that some of these issues take care of themselves. Last week I got a letter from a superintendent in Howard County who has the community's public library in his high school, has a master's degree individual with library science, and the Department of Ed would not give them a waiver to use that person as a media specialist. That is a true waste of community resources. That's a duplication of community resources. So I think the Department of Ed has to be active in addressing that issue.
All right, thank you. Dr. Wood gets our next question. And this is from Jeffrey Stevens, Superintendent of DeKalb County Easter Consolidated School District. As Superintendent of Public Instruction, will you be an advocate for public education, or will you seek to provide funds and state resources to non-public programs or organizations?
Thank you. The state superintendent needs to be an advocate for all forms of education, not merely public education. I think with the question, though, when you're talking about public resources for private schools, there are two basic tenets that I would espouse. First of all, I believe if you are going to accept public money, your school must be truly open to all members of the public. In other words, you must accept any student without reservation, regardless of their handicap, any disabilities they have, or their inability to pay additional tuition. So the standard is that the student can choose the school, not that the school can choose the student. The other thing that I believe strongly, and I will be the first to admit that not all Hoosiers agree with me on this position, but I believe that the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Indiana prohibit the use of public money to either advance or inhibit the exercise of religion. And many of our very fine, outstanding private schools in this state, religion is very integrated within all aspects of the curriculum, and I believe that would preclude them from being able to accept public funding. Finally, I would just like to say I never make the assumption because a family has children in private schools that they are advocating that public money should go to private schools. I think there are many people that have children in private institutions that do believe in the separation of the church and state and that we should not have opportunity where public money flows to those institutions.
Dr. Bennett, a response.
I don't think many of our very, very powerful special interest groups will let us get to that point. I think we need to be very pragmatic about it and understanding of that. That being said, I am a strong proponent of competition. I believe all forms of education represent competitive partners in education. I do believe that the ills of society and the stresses of society, along with technology, have outstripped our ability in public education to serve all kids. And we should embrace all of our competitive partners. One, they make us better. Two, they provide services to students we may not be able to provide services to. So I do believe that if the Department of Education does its job, and we provide resources and we deregulate our public schools to the extent that they can compete, I believe public schools in Indiana will compete and win against anyone. And I think that in and of itself should make that question really kind of a moot question. Because the fact is we should never be afraid to compete, and if we are, we don't belong in this business.
Rebuttal, Dr. Wood.
I believe this is one of the fundamental differences between Dr. Bennett and I in this campaign, and he and I would both share that we agree on far more things than we disagree, but I think there is a fundamental difference between us here. I believe I'm saying no to private money or public money to a private institution that has reservations for students, and I believe his answer would indicate that he does believe there is room for public money to go to private institutions.
Thank you. And Dr. Bennett, you get the next question, which is from Steve Yeager, Superintendent of Northwest Allen County Schools. What is your stance in reference to the exorbitant and escalating health care costs for school employees?
That is an incredible question because there's probably not an economy of scale that is larger in our budgets than health insurance. Our school corporation in Greater Clark pays about $13,000 per family plan. And that is a huge expenditure. And there are corporations across the state that are north of $20,000. Now, the reason I give you that is an unusually large portion of our general fund. And it's a piece that we all agree we need to get control of. Our issue is there is legislation called Public Law 217, which requires school corporations to negotiate that with their exclusive representative, either the ISTA or the IFT. So in order to address that economy of scale, and in order to make that an efficiency where we can drive those dollars to the classroom, we would have to address Public Law 217, and that will be a legislative issue. So it will be incumbent upon us if health care becomes an issue that does not allow us to efficiently educate kids, we should go to the Teachers Association and we should be very honest about that, and we should ask them to partner with us as we settle that problem.
Dr. Wood, response?
First of all, I think this is a good example where economic consolidation may provide some relief to school corporations if they pool their resources in purchasing health insurance programs. But the reality is we are going to have to deal with this issue on a national basis, and this is something that school corporations are not going to solve by themselves. This is probably one of the great challenges we are going to face as a country during the next decade, is reining in the cost of health insurance and making it available for all American citizens. And until we are able to deal with that on a national basis where we can fairly tackle this problem for all citizens of our country, not only school corporations and public employees, but private sectors are going to struggle with this mightily, and it is going to be, I believe, one of the greatest challenges we face as a country in the next decade.
Dr. Bennett, rebuttal?
There's really no rebuttal other than the fact that we need to keep in mind that when we are spending somewhere between 85 and 91% of our general fund on salary and benefits, and we have that large piece of the salary and benefits as health care, we have to address that. We have to empower schools to address that, and we will need to have that discussion with the ISTA.
Thank you.
Our next question goes to Dr. Wood, and it is from Kathy Stephen, the superintendent of Randolph Eastern School Corporation, and she asks, would you support Indiana going to a common student management system so that data could be extracted from the statewide database for state reports? She says local schools are spending an inordinate amount of time and money to do multiple state reports.
I think one of the core questions that the state superintendent and the Department of Education are going to have to ask is the information that we're seeking from local school corporations something that is absolutely necessary that we have, or it is something that would be nice to have. I think the department is going to have to be very sensitive to the time considerations, not only that the local school corporations have to deal with, but that the Department of Education has to deal with in limited resources in collecting data. I would say, in a positive sense, that the Department of Ed has been very effective in recent years in gathering data and making very useful statistical information available on their web page that is very helpful to all local school corporations. I think the challenge in the next few years is going to be, at what point have we achieved enough information, and are we going to have to stop gathering so much information and maybe picking and choosing and prioritizing how we spend time in gathering that data. Again, I think the State Department has to request minimal information that does not keep a local school corporation from, on their own volition or their own initiative, collecting more data for their own use. But again, I think that is something that the state wants to do at a minimum. If the local schools want to go beyond that and what they do in their own community, that should be something they should be empowered to do.
Dr. Bennett, response?
My answer to that is yes. I think the superintendent mentions a very real problem in school corporations, and that is, one, we are required to give a lot of data. There's no question. But the second issue is we all give it in different forms, and as it comes out, that data looks very different sometimes to the Department of Ed and how it's disseminated out throughout the state. So a standard common student management system that reports to a standard common student management system in the Department of Ed would be a huge efficiency. Now, I do agree with Dr. Wood that, we could probably streamline the amount of information we ask for, but student management and financial data should be consistent. We should be able to track and address expenditures from the financial side, revenues from the financial side, as well as student data in a seamless manner from every school corporation in the state up to the Department of Ed.
Dr. Wood?
I identified earlier that we had some differences. This is one of those issues that we agree.
Thank you. Our next question goes to Dr. Bennett. The No Child Left Behind Act has placed increased importance on accountability and test scores, and in many schools, the increasing number of students for whom English is not the first language has affected test scores in a negative way. Do you feel that some schools with a high number of these students should be held to a different standard that takes this special challenge into account?
Well, I don't think there's any question that No Child Left Behind and its articulation with the state's accountability law, Public Law 221, is a challenge. There is no question about that. And I think the highlight of No Child Left Behind really, and the problems with it, are shown by, one, the English as a second language kids and our special needs population. Both of those present very unique issues to school corporations as they move to look at their accreditation, their accountability under No Child Left Behind. I want to say that we must address those two subgroups. There is currently an initiative in place called differentiated accountability that came down from the federal government that does allow schools to look at those isolated incidents if we do have just one subgroup or maybe two subgroups where a school corporation has fallen short. But we need to do two things. We need to articulate PL 221 and No Child Left Behind so they are understandable to kids, parents, taxpayers, businesses, and we need to address the problems as they apply to English as a second language kids and special needs children.
Dr. Wood, response?
Thank you. The premise behind No Child Left Behind is an honorable premise. It says that we are no longer going to judge schools by the most advantaged students who attend. We're going to judge schools by the students in greatest need. The problem with No Child Left Behind, it is so punitive in nature by design. It does not celebrate success. It basically hits you with a stick because you do not have success. And that's a self-defeating program. So there are technical corrections that we can make to the law that I think will greatly enhance its effectiveness. When we're talking about special needs children with English as second language needs, we have to recognize that they do face particular challenges, but we should not deem a school as failing because their students in those particularly challenging areas do not make the progress that students in other areas may achieve. What we have to do is celebrate the successes we have, the subgroups that are making progress, and then continue to emphasize the ability of the students who need that additional help to allow them to make progress, maybe not at as great of rate. The bottom line in all this is, folks, we need to look at the glass half full, not half empty. We need to celebrate success, and we need to understand that we have an obligation to the students that have not achieved that success, but we need to put it in the proper context of an achievement level and understand that as long as these students continue to demonstrate progress and are working to the best of their ability, that they are doing what we should expect of them.
Dr. Bennett, rebuttal.
Well, I would like to simply say I am an incredible proponent of accountability. I strongly feel that we should have accountability for our schools. So I don't want to diminish the importance of No Child Left Behind or Public Law 221. We may not like sometimes what those things say, but you can't look in a mirror and not like what you see and then blame the mirror. We have to address the fact that we have slipped as a nation, we have slipped as a state, and we have to take very definitive means to make sure that we address those issues.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. The next question goes to Dr. Wood. Do you feel that the Superintendent of Public Instruction should continue to be an elected office, or should it be appointed by the governor?
Thank you. Dr. Bennett and I are both standing for election on November 4th to a 4-year term. And it would be my expectation, if I were elected by the people on November 4th, that I would be obligated to serve in that capacity for 4 years. By the same token, the people would be obligated to give me 4 years to attempt to accomplish those things that need to be done during the next term. That being said, I think it is a fair discussion if we are going to look at ways to improve state government, make our government more efficient, perhaps involve our people on a greater basis, that anything should be on the table. And perhaps the appointment of this position is something that we could consider, as well as the appointment of other state positions that are currently elected. I would say, however, if the state superintendent position is to be appointed, we should look at other methods of appointment, not just the governor making an appointment. Perhaps something we should consider would be that a bipartisan state board of education would make the appointment of a nonpartisan state superintendent. I will say that this is an elected office presently. We run in a partisan setting, but if you're going to be successful as the state school superintendent, you're going to have to be willing to reach across the aisle and consider the viewpoints of all individuals, whether they're of your affiliation or not. We all are working towards a common purpose, and I believe those that have been successful in this role in the past have been those that have been willing to listen to all parties.
Dr. Bennett.
I do support an appointed superintendent, and I do support that appointment by the governor. I think that's consistent not only with the position of our current governor, Mitch Daniels, but also think it's consistent with our former governor, Frank O'Bannon, who was a Democrat. So that discussion has taken place on both sides of the aisle, and there's been agreement by this governor and a former governor. So I do strongly support the appointment. Like Dr. Wood, this is a 4-year term, and I intend to spend all 4 years making education in Indiana the best I can. But I do believe we should take a look at streamlining and depoliticizing this position and making this a cabinet-level position as an appointment by the governor.
Dr. Wood, rebuttal?
The only rebuttal that I would make to that is I think we also need to understand that ultimately this decision will not be made by the governor of Indiana or the next state superintendent. It will be made by the people of Indiana through their elected representatives in the Indiana General Assembly. So I think those that have feelings about this issue and want to see this issue discussed should feel empowered to talk with their elected representative or state senator about this particular issue and advocate if they believe it should be considered as an appointed position either by the governor or by the State Board of Ed. I think you should make your feelings known to those representatives once they are elected on November the 4th.
Thank you, gentlemen. The next question goes to Dr. Bennett. Would you reorganize or change the Indiana Department of Education, and if so, why and how?
Well, I don't think there's any question that you have two new guys standing up here, and I think both of us will bring change to the Department of Education. I believe the Department of Education should be reflective of what we would like to see from school corporations, and that is a streamlined, efficient organization that serves as a resource to schools. So we would have a streamlined Department of Education that is customer service driven, that provides resources to schools, that uses the first 90 days of our administration to take a look at every regulation that we have in the Department of Ed and determine which are unnecessary and which are necessary, and to strip those out so our school corporations can do their good work. Part of that would also be a consideration that we take part of the Department of Ed and maybe move it out into the state. Utilize our education service centers as hubs for some Department of Education personnel. Not taking the whole department out, some Department of Education personnel. A personal story. We had a terrible storm in Clark County. We had many of our schools, we were closed for an entire week. That was during GQE and I-STEP week. It would have been very nice had we had resources from the Department of Ed. We had the Department of Homeland Security come in. We had the Lieutenant Governor come in. But as a school superintendent, I was trying to feed 7,000 people in our schools, and I needed help from the Department of Ed. And that's not a criticism of Dr. Reed or any personnel. It's a criticism of the organization and the structure. And we need to address that so school corporations truly have a resource and a partner in the Department of Ed.
Dr. Wood, response?
Out of necessity, the Department of Education is going to have to change the next few years because of the statutory requirements from Indiana's accountability system are going to require many of the resources that the department has to be devoted specifically to helping local school corporations make improvements. So there's going to be a shift regardless of who would be elected to this position. I would say, first of all, I agree with many of the things that Dr. Bennett has said about efficiency and being user-friendly. I do not agree with his proposition of moving the department to the education service centers. I think there's a reason we have our state government in Indianapolis because of its central location. And again, it's a support organization. It will be supportive of schools throughout the state. I also do not agree that there is going to be a great number of regulations that will be stripped from the department, regardless of who sits in the chair. There are generally pretty good reasons why you have regulations, and if there's anything we've learned as a country in recent months, there's a real downside sometimes to very quickly discarding regulations, and you need to be sensitive before you throw out the rule book. So I think there are some of the basic agreements and some of the differences we have. I would also say I think there are many very talented people that work for the Department of Education today, and if I were elected, I would certainly hope to retain some of those individuals in their roles. So it's not, if I were to be elected as a different party from the current office holder, that I would want to come in wholesale and completely eliminate everyone that works in the department today.
And Dr. Bennett?
I'd like to just talk a little bit about deregulation, because I hear many times about what would schools look like if we had businessmen running them. And I think when you use that statement, you also bring with it the paradigm that the school will have the same deregulated nature that businesses have. And my position is, let's allow superintendents to run it like that first. Let's give superintendents the opportunity to run their schools in a deregulated manner. So I do think there is sufficient room for deregulation. And I do believe, and again, I want to be very clear, I would not be talking about moving the entire Department of Education out of Indianapolis. I'm talking about moving individuals on a resource basis out to our service centers so that schools can reach out and touch them immediately in a time of need and get a direct answer to a direct question.
All right, thank you. Next question goes to Dr. Wood. Do you think Indiana's schools are adequately funded, and what is your plan to provide equitable funding for school corporations throughout the state?
Anytime you're talking about funding for schools, you have to recognize that we have to do all that is possible and all that is reasonable for the children of this state. They are our most important untapped natural resource. But you also have to temper those decisions within the economic realities of your society and of your community. No responsible community official is going to put a chilling effect on the economic development of their community. So what I'm suggesting to you is we are going to have to do all that is reasonably possible for our students. We always need to find that threshold where we're moving up to the point where we're doing everything that is reasonable, but not crossing the line where we're going to have a negative impact on our community because we are overtaxing or drawing too many resources into our public school system. I will say this, I can make a strong case from both a moral and an economic basis that you are well served by having an outstanding school system in your community. When the community has confidence in the schools, your good families will stay, your good employers will stay, and you will be in a position where you will attract employers to your community that will help you with your tax burden. So it's an investment, and it's the idea, sometimes it takes some money to make money, and we don't want to lose sight of that. I think the thing you have to recognize is sometimes the most responsible public official isn't the one that says they're going to cut your taxes and save your money. It's the person who's going to do the best with your money, and the person that sometimes, even in an unpopular venue, is going to say, we're going to have to spend some money at this time to protect the integrity of our community and to be looking to the future.
Dr. Bennett, response?
Dr. Wood had mentioned some philosophical differences and some fundamental differences. This is one. Dr. Wood has mentioned that if we are going to improve education, we will have to possibly pass the bill on to the taxpayers. And that position for me states that if we're going to get better educational results, we have to give more money. And I believe we can get better educational results for our money. And I think we can do that with a creative method, and that is we can go to the legislature, we can talk about moving the silos away from our funds and giving school corporations true flexibility. In Richmond, Indiana, the superintendent, Alan Borff, saved over 20% in his transportation fund. My question to you is, why couldn't he use that to educate kids? Or if I am doing a good job in my school corporation managing our food services program, why can't I buy health and PE teachers? So I think we need to be more creative. I think we have money in the system that we don't have to pass a bill on to the taxpayers. And in this time of economic turbulence nationally, I don't think that's fair. I think I am a person as a superintendent that is a CEO of the largest taxing unit in the county, and I have an obligation to our taxpayers.
Dr. Wood, rebuttal?
Again, your obligation is to do the best possible job for your taxpayers, and sometimes you best serve your taxpayers by investing in your future and in the development of your community. Doing that responsibly, doing that in a look to the future is going to be the most, in my view, responsible type of government service.
Thank you. Our next question goes to Dr. Bennett. What should be the role of vocational education in K through 12 education?
I spent 2 years as a vocational school principal at the largest vocational school in the state, Prosser School of Technology, and it was an incredible experience. And I can also speak to this as a parent, because as a parent of 22-year-old triplets, I had two of my kids were very, if you will, let's just use a word that's probably not right and normal. They were regular achievers. One of the triplets, Katie, was a child with pretty severe special needs. And Katie went the vocational route. She didn't go the vocational route in high school, but she went the vocational route post-secondary. And I will tell you, vocational education is an incredible and under-tapped pathway in our schools. As a former vocational school principal, I know the value of that pathway. Properly utilized, properly marketed, properly presented to kids, that pathway will help us reduce the dropout rate, because we will be plugging kids into skilled areas for skilled trades that they wouldn't otherwise have. When we were at Prosser, we said it's not just enough to go to Prosser and get 2 years of vocational training. We wanted our kids to walk out with a national or state certification with that training. so that a young man or a young lady who was a welder, they could get an AWS certification and they could compete against adults and kids in the job market. So the role of vocational education is critical in developing multiple pathways for students as they go out and become competitive in this society.
Dr. Wood, response?
Any student that wants to have the opportunity to go to college, we should make that opportunity available to them. But we should not expect every student should go to college. And we should provide reasonable alternatives for those students that isn't their selected path. When we're talking about vocational education, however, we have to recognize that concept has changed markedly in just the last few years. And the type of instruction that we are going to have to provide those students is going to be far different than the vocational programs that might have been in place 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or beyond. It is becoming much more demanding. The basic skill level is greater. The technology level is greater. And the other thing we have to recognize is any skill level that we provide to our students today will probably be obsolete in just a few years. So not only are we going to have to give them the basic skills that they can go out and find viable employment in the short term, we're going to have to give them a lifestyle and a method of dealing with problems where they can continue to retool and retrain as they go through life, so as the demands of our technology change, that they are able to be flexible and move with those changes. So that's what I see as the most important issues of vocational education. It's a very crucial part of our education program. I think there are a lot of success stories in Indiana today. We should, again, celebrate those and make those available to the communities that maybe have not had an opportunity to engage in those similar programs. There's a lot of good work being done. Let's capitalize on it and share it.
Dr. Bennett.
Again, Dr. Wood and I have talked about our areas of agreement, and we clearly agree on vocational education. I would also say the vocational education program in our schools is a great vehicle for adult ed, that our vocational schools should be open for adult ed. And we should have vocational students that have the flexibility to pursue a skilled trade and go to college, just like my daughter Katie does. Today she works as a cosmetologist and she goes to college at a pace she can take. So I think vocational education, again, let's keep in mind, there is not a one-size-fits-all program in education, and we have to have multiple pathways to reduce the dropout rate, make our kids productive members of society, and make them competitive against or with all other kids.
Thank you. We have time for one more question before we go to the break, and this goes to Dr. Wood. What are some strategies we could enact to recruit and retain people to the teaching profession, and how do you feel about some of the alternative preparation paths, such as Teach America or alternative certification?
We are facing a marked teacher shortage in this country, and that is going to require us to look at many creative alternatives to allowing people to return to the classroom. I applaud the state of Indiana for already making some of these programs available and also making it easier for retired teachers to return to the classroom, even if it's on a part-time basis or a shared basis. So that's addressing a practical problem that we have. As far as attracting and retaining teachers to the profession, first of all, I would say those of us that are teachers need to do a better job of talking up the profession, because it is a great and honorable profession. It is one that has served my family well. My mom and dad were both teachers. My wife and I are both teachers. I have a daughter who's a teacher. It's a great way to make a living, and it is a great way to serve your community and be one of the good guys. And I think maybe we need to do a better job of talking that up. There's a great deal of satisfaction in the profession. But we're going to have to go beyond satisfaction. We're going to have to recognize if we are going to attract and retain the best and brightest, we're going to have very competitive salaries. And I would be the first to say, with competitive salaries should become competitive performance. And we should expect people to perform well for those salaries. But we are going to have to be sensitive to the fact if we are going to want the best and brightest in the profession, we're going to have to pay them at a rate commensurate to other opportunities they might have in employment.
Dr. Bennett, response?
Well, I can tell you I do not believe what we're doing is enough. And I'm going to go back to our original, the question prior to this, as a vocational school principal. As a vocational school principal, I had a gentleman who taught masonry in my school by the name of Steve Terry. Steve Terry is one of the most gifted teachers I've ever met. He went through the occupational specialist certification program. He didn't even have a college degree. He came to us out of the trade. He went to all of the methods and pedagogy classes while he was teaching. and his students are some of the most motivated and invigorated and inspired kids I've ever seen. So my question is, why can't we do that with chemists and physicists? Why can't we do that with business? Why can't we do that in other areas of school? So I think that's an area we have to explore. And again, I'll go back to the librarian. There is a lady with a master's degree in library science who is not allowed to serve as a school media specialist. That school corporation has to take 2 teachers out of the classroom and supplement her services and take instruction away from kids. So I believe we need to take a strong look at alternative forms of assessment. I don't think any stone should be unturned regarding transition to teaching programs and the other types of creative programs. And I do believe, just like Dr. Wood said, we have to recruit, we have to train, we have to evaluate our teachers so they're the best. And I have to tell you, the other area we have to address is our minority teachers. We have to recruit more minority teachers into our schools to serve our students.
Dr. Wood, rebuttal.
I'm in complete agreement with that, and particularly the issue of minority teachers. Very clearly, the student population that we serve in Indiana is not reflected by our faculty population, and that does need to be a concern for us, and I think it needs to be a top priority of the Department of Education and will be if I'm elected state superintendent.
All right. Thanks, gentlemen. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we will have your closing statements, so stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to this debate between the candidates for Indiana Superintendent of Public Instruction. It is now time for our closing statements, and we turn to Dr. Richard Wood for the first closing statement. Dr. Wood.
Thank you. This event is billed as a debate between the two party candidates, but it is something more than a debate. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a job interview. And what we are doing this evening is we're going through the oral interview phase where you're asking questions and we're giving you very brief responses. But we have to recognize the limitations of this exercise. We have just a few minutes to respond and to give a rebuttal. And we're dealing with issues that have taken many years to develop, and they're very complicated. And you cannot solve these problems in just a few minutes soundbite in this sort of setting. So what I'm suggesting to you is that your research in making a decision for this position has to go beyond what you've heard this evening. You certainly have to consider our opinions and our views, and we've tried to identify some of our philosophical differences. But you have to go beyond that. Just as in any job interview situation, you don't make your decision on who you're going to hire based on the verbal interview. You also do background checks. You look into a person's past. You look to see where they've been successful, where they've not been successful, where are their strengths, where are their weaknesses, what are things they should have done more of or less of. And you weigh all of that, and then you hope that you make the best possible decision when you fill the job. And that's no different in what we're doing here. And I'm going to suggest to you that both Dr. Bennett and I have been educators in this state for a number of years, and we have very different experiences and different levels of experience. And you're going to have to also look at what we've accomplished, what have been our successes, what have been the things that perhaps we wish we had done differently. I've worked for a number of school corporations in this state. I've been blessed to be superintendent of the Tippecanoe School Corporation for the last 19 years. And during that 19 years, we've accomplished many things. Nothing accomplished by myself. Anything that was a positive for our school district was done with a variety of people working together to do what was best for the students of our community. We didn't always agree at the beginning, and we didn't always agree with the end product, but we worked together and tried to move things along. And I will tell you, although collectively we had successes during those 19 years, over those 19 years, I, as an individual superintendent, had some failures. I had some things I wish I'd done differently, and hopefully I've learned from those experiences. And if I'm elected your state superintendent, I will promise you I will do my best, but I cannot promise you I will always do the right thing. I may make mistakes in that role too, but that's just part of the process that we all engage in, and I'll try to keep any errors to a minimum and the strengths to a maximum. I would also say I've been blessed over a 36-year career as not only a superintendent, an assistant superintendent, and a principal and a teacher to work with great kids. And I've worked with supportive communities and great teachers. And I believe that we have the capacity as a state to do anything. As I said to you earlier, our greatest untapped resource is the ability, the future ability of our children. And it is our obligation to those children, it is an obligation to our quality of life in this state that we do the best possible things for the children of this state. That is our future. That is going to maintain the quality of life for our fine state. And I hope to work with you to make a better future for the children of Indiana. Thank you.
Dr. Bennett.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to go back to Bethel, where I spent Sunday morning. And I'd like to talk about how we're going to achieve making that one life for our children the best. And I will say to you, and I will agree with Dr. Wood, this is a job interview. This is a job interview, and this is an interview on how we're going to provide a service for you for the next 4 years. I'm very proud to say that I come before you with a very clear plan. Our plan includes a vision. It includes the vision that Indiana will be the #1 education state in our country and will be competitive with any other country worldwide. That is our vision. It's an aggressive vision, and we intend to reach it. We think any business that wants to move, they should come to Indiana. We think any family that wants to move, they should come to Indiana. That's our vision. Our plan includes 3 primary goals. Restore discipline to our schools. Make our schools environments of high-level learning. Drive dollars to the classroom. Be efficient stewards of the very precious investments you make in our schools. Make sure our dollars are spent on student learning. And 3, put the best educators we can put in front of a generation of Hoosiers that some of us may never see. We have to recruit. We have to train. We have to compensate. And we have to evaluate our teachers as the professionals that they are. So we have a plan that has a vision. We have a plan that has 3 primary goals. And we have 2 very simple strategies to help us attain those goals. 1, we will deregulate. We are going to uncuff the hands of the very talented administrators and the very caring school boards we have in Indiana and let them go chase our vision. And the second one is to provide a Department of Ed that is a resource for our schools, a customer-driven partner for our schools that sets a standard, helps school corporations chase the standard, and yes, at times holds school corporations accountable when they don't attain the standard. So I ask you tonight to think about that. I ask you to think about a plan to take Indiana to the top of the class nationally and internationally. Thank you, and I would appreciate your support on November 4th.
I want to thank the candidates, Tony Bennett and Richard Wood, for joining us and sharing their visions for public education in Indiana, and I'd like us all to give them a round of applause. The debate, once again, was brought to you by Indiana's Newscenter and the Mike Down Center for Indiana Politics from the IPFW campus. Thanks to all of you for watching. Thanks to all in our audience for joining us. And please remember to go out on November 4th and cast your ballot for the candidate of your choice. It's one of the most important responsibilities that we have as citizens, and we hope you will take advantage of that right. Thanks for being with us. Good night.